Hi, everyone. If you're joining us, we're just going to wait a few more minutes so we can get critical mass to get started. Just hold tight for a few minutes and then we can start. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We're so thrilled to have you join us for today's State of Play webinar. We're going to give folks just a couple more minutes to join so we can have a few more people for the beginning of the webinar, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So maybe just one more minute. We have a good amount of folks who have joined. Exciting. But yeah, thank you for being here with us. If you're in your lunch or if you just took some time out of work, whatever the case is, thank you for joining. Just one more minute. Okay, I think we reached critical mass. So once again, hello and welcome. We're gonna go ahead and get started since we got a lot to cover today. But before we dig in, I want to briefly introduce myself and provide some brief logistical information for the webinar. My name is Erika Viola, and I serve as the Young Center's Communication Director. I'll be moderating today's webinar. So as I'm sure many of you know, there is so much happening in the world of immigration. So today we'll have the opportunity to hear from Young Center's policy experts, who you can see here on your screen: Nina Dixon-Davis, Abena Hutchful, and Ann Kelsey, who are again part of our policy team. And they're going to be providing a top-line overview of some of the major harms and challenges that we're currently impacting immigrant children and families, as well as efforts the Young Center is working on to advance and protect the rights of all children. And we're also going to learn how you can take action, because I know many of you are here to figure out what you can do given all the news that you have been hearing on immigration. We're also going to have time at the end to address questions. If you have any, feel free to drop any questions you have. You're going to see there is a Zoom at the bottom, a Zoom Q&A feature. You are more than welcome to ask as we go along in the webinar, and we're going to consolidate all the questions. And at the very end, we're going to be answering, as much as we can with the time that we have. Also, there is closed captioning, so you can also go up to the bottom, and you're going to see a button there you can click if you need closed captioning. And if for any reason you're experiencing any technical problems, you can reach out to my colleague Annabelle, who is here on the, you can see on the list of on staff, and she's going to be able to assist you if you need any help. Last thing to mention is that we are going to be recording the webinar. So if you need to see it later, or if you need to share it with anybody, we're going to be sharing it with you afterwards, so you can have that. All right, so you can change slide. There you go. So let me just start to talking about a little bit about the Young Center for those of you who don't know much about us. For years, the Young Center has focused our efforts on advocating for the rights and best interests of unaccompanied and separated immigrant children in federal ORR custody through our Child Advocate Program. ORR stands for the Office of Refugee Resettlement. You're going to hear a lot of this agency, so we're going to basically say ORR, that's what it stands for. Since we began in 2004, the Young Center has been a fierce champion for the rights and best interests of unaccompanied immigrant children, making sure that wherever they land, and whether in the US or in their home country, that they are safe. We have continued to fight tirelessly to amplify children's voices, support their placement in community-based settings outside of government custody, and also making clear to the public and government officials that immigrant children are children and should be treated as such. I'll say it again, immigrant children are children and they should be treated as such. In addition, the Young Center has trained hundreds of child advocate volunteers who work with our staff, social workers, and attorneys to get to know these children in custody, learn what their hopes and wishes are, and advocate for key decision makers working on their cases to consider the child's safety, rights, and best interests when making life-altering decisions about them. Slide 4. There you go. Throughout our advocacy, we've honed in these 4 main priorities when it comes to advocating for the safety, rights, and best interests of unaccompanied children. One of the first points that you can see there is promoting family unity and ending policies that lead to family separation, protecting children in custody, ensuring children have access to a range of legal relief in the US, and for change the narrative about children and amplifying the voices of immigrant youth. We have a range of experiences on this call today, and which I am so excited for you all to meet our team. Some of you may work directly with unaccompanied children, and many of you don't. What we shared today, maybe some, might be very new to you. So we're going to try our best to kind of explain it all as much as we can briefly. But regardless, we love to hear from folks. So we're going to launch this poll real quick, just to kind of get a sense of how much you know or understand about the experiences of unaccompanied immigrant children. So if you can just we give everybody 1 minute. If you can take a quick minute to just tell us on a scale from 1 to 5, how familiar you are with the experiences of unaccompanied children in the US. I give you all a minute. I see the answer is trickling in. Okay. Okay, we have about 80% of you have participated. So let's just give folks a few more seconds. Okay. Alrighty, so it stopped. So it kind of, I think we have some results. Okay. So we have most of you, about 24%, are very familiar. So that's perhaps some of you who have been involved with the Young Center or who have been listening to the news. We have about 22% of you are, sort of familiar. There is about 88% of you, so about 5 folks on the audience who are not very familiar. So yeah, that's a really good, just good for us to know how much we need to share. And it seems like some of you have, a little bit more experience, whether, and some of you really want to hear a lot more about what we have to say. All right, so if we can turn to slide 6, I'm sorry. So the challenges and circumstances of unaccompanied and separate children, the challenges that they face navigating our country's immigration system are often very specific, dense, and complicated. In all of this, it seems there are countless stories in the news that unfortunately perpetuate misconceptions and misunderstandings about who unaccompanied children are and what situations they've encountered coming to the US and what challenges they face when they are in the US. So who are unaccompanied children? For those of you who said that you don't know too much about the circumstances of these children. So most of them travel with relatives, trusted adults, sometimes smugglers, or on their own seeking safety. They are designated and unaccompanied by the government if they are not with a parent or legal guardian. After that, they are transferred out of the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, into the Health and Human Services, or HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement, or as I mentioned earlier, ORR, as we call them, which is a child protection agency. They are then reunified with family, or they are transferred to long-term community-based placement. So these are sort of the children who we're going to be talking about in this webinar. Today, you'll be hearing from several of our Young Center policy experts who will provide an overview of the current challenges and opportunities when it comes to protecting and advancing the rights of immigrant children. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to my colleague, Abena Hutchful. Abena can, if you can join us. And I want to ask if you can talk a little bit about the main challenges and opportunities we're facing currently under the Biden administration, and just specifically as it pertains to immigrant children arriving in at the southern border. So I'm going to pass it on to you, and if you can just tell us a little bit more about this.
Thank you, Erika. And thank you everyone for joining us today and hopefully joining us in this fight. I'm Abena Hutchful. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a policy and litigation attorney with the Young Center. And to answer your question, Erika, at the start of the year, President Biden announced several enforcement measures that will severely restrict access to asylum for many immigrants, including children and families. And these measures will also perpetuate family separation. Already, the Biden administration was continuing the use of Title 42, which was a policy that was put in place by the Trump administration in March of 2020 under the guise of the COVID public health emergency. And just like the previous administration, Biden's administrations used Title 42 as immigration policy to bar asylum seekers from entering the US. We've seen since Title 42 was put in place in March 2020, it's been used to expel more than 1.8 million people. That was a figure that was reported last year. These people include tens of thousands of children trying to, seek protection at the border. It's had a disproportionate impact, particularly on Black migrants. More Haitians have been expelled under the Biden administration than the previous 3 presidents combined due to Title 42. And the vast majority of these people are, expelled without a chance to present their cases to an immigration judge, to seek asylum. And so immigrant rights advocates, including the Young Center, have been fighting tirelessly in the courts and urging the Biden administration and Congress to restore access to asylum at the border. And this fight has led to federal court orders finding that it was unlawful to apply Title 42 to unaccompanied children and asylum seekers. And yet still families and individuals seeking asylum are still subject to Title 42. So this policy has also over the years led many families to make the difficult and desperate decision to separate from children that they from their children at the border in the hopes that the children can find safety if they enter the US alone. So it's a horrible policy that's fueling family separation. And as you mentioned the Child Advocate Program. Our Child Advocate Program has been appointed to many children in government custody whose parents or adult relatives weren't able to enter the US with them. because of Title 42. So we've been extremely vocal about the harms that this policy inflicts on children and their families, how it goes against Biden's promise to respect the legal right to asylum and to keep families together. And as I mentioned, there are a small number of migrants that can be exempted based on vulnerability pursuant to those federal court orders. But last month, the administration also began requiring migrants to use an app called the CBP-1 app to apply for those exemptions. And basically now migrants have to use this app to schedule appointments at select ports of entry at the border to determine if they're eligible for exemptions before they can enter the US. And for asylum seekers, this is basically another barrier to asylum. First of all, not everyone has access to a smartphone and the Wi-Fi that you need to access this app. And we've heard reports that it's extremely difficult to access the app in areas like Reynosa and Matamoros, where there's really weak Wi-Fi connections, so it doesn't account for the digital divide. And there are also many technical issues with the app itself. Once you are able to get on, there are backlog issues, there are other tech issues, the system keeps crashing. There are limited language availability. When it was first rolled out, it wasn't even available in Haitian Creole. So these are all flaws with the app. There's also a facial capture feature. If you can try and download the app yourself, and it won't let you submit any application for anything without first capturing your photo. But we've heard reports that it doesn't recognize the faces of people with darker skin tones as well as lighter skin tones. So it's disproportionately affecting, again, Black migrants who can't access the app. But despite all of these flaws, the Biden administration is relying on this app to implement its border enforcement measures. Just yesterday, you all may have seen in the news that the Biden administration announced a new regulation that will effectively ban entry to any asylum seeker who travels through a third country without first seeking asylum in the transit country. And if that sounds familiar, this asylum ban, it's because Trump had implemented a similar ban when he was in office, and that was also found to be unlawful by federal courts. And yet here we are seeing this other barrier come up again. And without question, this rule, like Title 42, will result in restricted access to asylum for many children and their families, and will just continue to fuel family separation. So these measures are all on their own harmful, right? They continue to fuel family separation. They limit access to asylum at the border. But then there's a final measure, or the final measure that I'll talk about. This is the last piece of the puzzle, is the administration's expanded use of expedited processes or expedited removals, which are procedures that the administration uses to deport immigrants faster without giving them a chance to go through the full immigration court process. So this process basically prioritizes speed over fairness. It denies children and their families due process and the right to be fully heard, to also access legal representation in bringing their claims before an immigration judge. And it severely increases the risk that they will be deported or returned to dangerous conditions in Mexico or their home countries. And again, will incentivize family separation. So to sum up, each of these measures on their own and in totality are a far cry from what the president originally committed to doing when he entered office, to keep immigrant families together, to protect immigrant children. These measures don't do any of that. And the Young Center has been continuously pushing the Biden administration to honor its commitments to restore access to asylum. And I just want to talk about a couple of the ways that we've been doing that. We've been pushing to end unnecessary family separation, and after multiple engagements with government officials, for the first time, the government has agreed to test an initiative to release children within 10 days to the adult relatives that they traveled with to the border. So they're doing this by co-locating staff from the Office of Refugee Resettlement to designated ports of entry, where ORR staff can work with CBP to to verify children's family relationships and ensure that they're promptly released to their family members. We also continue to push hard for ORR to expand its network of family-based placements and small-scale shelters, and stop its use of massive, large-scale emergency facilities at the border, which the government's continuing to rely on. So that advocacy is ongoing, and we're committed to that. And we've been calling for an end to the use of an expansion of expedited processes. This is, a procedural measure that is being weaponized to quickly deport children and families without due process, and we are vehemently against that. The good news for all of you all is that both the expedited processing measure and the asylum ban that I discussed too, the transit ban, these aren't final. There's still a very narrow but still existing window of opportunity for us to urge the administration not to implement these measures. Our colleague Mina will be talking more about what we can do and how you can help later on. But there's just been a lot happening this year, and it's only February.
Thank you for that, Abena. And I just want to invite everybody to take a deep breath. It's a lot. We are facing a lot of challenges. And I just, want to remind folks that we are going to talk about some of the things that you can do to be able to take action later on in the webinar. But, there's just a lot going on, and we are in a situation where the current administration is, instead of meeting their promise to meet people or to welcome people with humanity and dignity, they are again relying on some of the tactics from the previous administration to dehumanize people at the border in an effort to stop immigrants from reaching the border and trying to seek asylum. So thank you for that, Abena. And now I'm going to turn to Anne, who leads our work on disability rights policy. And she's going to talk a little bit more about the Young Center's role in serving unaccompanied youth in the immigration system and what kids have to experience while in custody. As I mentioned earlier, they are eventually sent to ORR custody, and there are a lot of challenges. So Anne, if you can take it away and just tell us a little bit more about what we have seen.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, I'm Ann Kelsey, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Disability Rights Policy Analyst at the Young Center. And I saw a question in the chat, so I did just want to mention for those of you that may have joined late that we are recording the webinar and we will be sharing it out afterwards. So if you join late or have to leave early, not to worry, you can catch up on what you missed with the recording. I also hope you appreciated that deep breath that you took with Erica, because as she mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what we see for children in custody. And as she mentioned, once children are apprehended at the border, they are transferred to shelters run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement to await ORR's approval of a family member or other sponsor to care for them outside of custody. And then while they're with that sponsor, they do continue their immigration proceedings, but in that family-based setting. But while kids are in custody, they have to adapt to really new, unfamiliar congregate care settings where they interact with adults and children they don't know. where they experience significant restrictions on their movement and freedom and behavior. They can face language and cultural barriers. And the majority of these shelters are large-scale facilities that can be hundreds or even thousands of children. And that's really far removed from the family and family-based settings where we know that children thrive. Now, if children have family to sponsor them and everything goes smoothly in that sponsorship process, the stay in custody can be just a few weeks. And the overall average length of stay is about 30 days. But if there's no identified sponsor, or if ORR has concerns about the suitability of that sponsor, or any number of other issues will pop up, children can be in custody for months or even years. And the children who struggle to adapt to some of those restrictions and rules, and that struggle can be due to a disability, to trauma they've experienced and their trauma triggers, or simply they're showing developmentally appropriate responses to authority, which anyone who has been a teenager or knows a teenager can understand. Those kids can experience disproportionately long stays in detention, disproportionately, again, in restrictive settings, without receiving appropriate evidence-based trauma-informed mental health care. And I know that those are all a little jargony, but I'm happy to talk more about what some of those mean later on if folks have questions. So as Erica mentioned, the Young Center is appointed to particularly vulnerable youth, and that includes pregnant and parenting youth, young children, children whose language is other than English or Spanish, children at risk of aging out, and children with disabilities. And the Young Center is often appointed to children with disabilities, not because there's something inherent in the disability, but because the system is really not set up to consider their individual needs and accommodate those needs. Instead, it punishes them as a result of their disability. And so one example of this is the use of SIRs, or special incident reports, which is how ORR and its providers document a wide array of children's behaviors, and whether that is developmentally appropriate behavior that's a result of a disability, small, large, regardless of the context of what's going on, whether they just got bad news about their family, they're not feeling well, all of this context that might precipitate behavior is too often absent from these SIRs, when what we know is that children's behavior reflects their experiences, their developmental stage, the trauma, and even disability-related behaviors. And even though we know all this, SIRs can still lead to kids being punished and being stepped up into more restrictive facilities and kept in custody longer, all of which compounds the trauma and harm that they experience while in custody. So along with the wonderful National Immigrant Justice Center, in September of last year, the Young Center published a report on this ORR system calling for an overhaul and calling for a system that really prioritizes trauma-informed practices and prevents harmful overreporting. And we're seeing, happily, some good news here. We're seeing ORR beginning to make some of these changes to the use of SIRs. And we are optimistic that through our advocacy and work on this issue that we'll continue to see more changes. One other harmful practice I did just want to mention is the limited contact that kids are able to have with their loved ones. And particularly, unaccompanied kids in custody are only guaranteed 2 phone calls per week at 10 minutes each with their family members. And that's a floor. And some facilities will do more, but many use that as the max. And as a result, kids get very limited contact with their family, regardless of what else is going on in their lives, their age, their health, what's going on with their families, and it's very harmful to children. So along with the Physicians for Human Rights Asylum Network, we have been urging the federal government to reform these policies and to ensure that children in custody can access regular contact with their parents and caregivers. And in this world of Zoom and video chats and Snapchat and WhatsApp and what have you, it's really not a big ask, we think, to encourage family connection and family communication. So I want to take a step back and talk about kind of what our vision is. So this custodial system and these congregate care facilities are seen by many, from both inside and outside the system as a neutral space, better than ICE, just taking care of kids until they can get to family. But for many children, and particularly the children that we serve, that's really not the case. They experience ongoing harms and trauma while in custody. And so we want to, really reframe this and push for some of the things that we've been talking about. So promoting family unity, again, we can't say that enough. Treating children as children and understanding developmentally appropriate behavior. Serving children at home with their family or where there's not family available in home-like foster care settings. And getting children the supports and services they need in the community, not in restrictive settings. So we know from disability rights experience, from child welfare experience, that children thrive at home. And pretty much any service or support can be provided in a home or community and doesn't have to be provided in some restrictive setting or treatment setting. Really, home is best. And immigration custody is not neutral. So I just wanted to quickly mention a couple of the more disability things that we're working on in conjunction with many partners and coalitions. The first of which is the Children's Safe Welcome Act, a bill which would require keeping children whenever possible with family and would improve conditions of custody and has a strong disability lens. This bill was introduced by Senator Merkley last summer, and we continue to advocate for its passage. Likewise, we worked with key disability rights experts like the Bazelon Center and the National Disability Rights Network to provide extensive recommendations on what should be included in new regulations that would govern OR's custody of unaccompanied children. And this is we call it the foundational rule. And so our recommendations would ensure that the needs of children, all children, and particularly children with disabilities, are considered in drafting these important regulations. Another thing that we did working together with disability and immigration advocates is to submit a comment to the Department of Education on the education needs of unaccompanied children. So currently, children with disabilities in custody do not receive sufficient or usually any education services related to their disability. So assessments, services, specialized instruction, all the kind of things that we think or that the kids are eligible for example, in their schools, in the domestic world. And that's one thing when a kid is in custody for a few weeks, but it's an entirely different thing when the child is in custody for months and years. We're continuing to advocate on education issues. And I think that's really critical to ensuring that if a child has to be in custody, that they're really getting their needs and their rights respected. And great, that is just a few highlights of our work related to conditions of custody. And so, Erica, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Anne. And as you all have heard so far, the landscape of policies and practices that threaten the rights, safety, and well-being of immigrant children is so vast. Over the course of 2022, our organization, the Young Center, has worked directly with over 1,600 children held in ORR custody, advocating for their prompt placement in family-based settings and reunification with their loved ones. I want to tell you about one case that our child advocates worked on recently, and this is involving a 3-year-old boy from Honduras who was unaccompanied. After moving from ORR custody to a foster family placement, this little boy was terrified, and he was also alone. His case was caught up in months of hearings at the state level. This was in North Carolina, where the judge and attorneys struggled to determine how to best navigate the uniqueness of this child's case. What eventually, his foster parents reached out to the Young Center for support, and we were able to appoint a child advocate to help support this little boy and navigate the complexities of the case. And after working directly with the child, the judge and the attorney appointed to the case basically got in touch with the child's father. And the Young Center was able to reunite this little boy with his dad. And just recently, he actually celebrated his 5th birthday. So, it was one of those stories that we can definitely say that, we are really proud of the work that our child advocates did to be able to reunify this little boy with his father. So without question, there is so much that needs to change about our immigration system so that children are treated as children, as we mentioned before, and are protected from harm. And it's stories like these, however, that are, the ones that we're just so extremely proud of, as I said, because they remind us just how vital our work is. And with support from folks such as those on this call today, many of you have continued to advance our advocacy and direct service every single day. So thank you for that. And there's still opportunities for us to have positive influence on immigration policy and practice. And we're going to talk, how we can do that. And I know there's a question on the Q&A on how we can influence our congressional leaders as well. But it's important for us to remember that there are many opportunities and areas for us to continue to have this positive influence on immigration policy and practice. So I'm going to introduce Mina, who I'm going to ask if you can share some of the ways that the Young Center advances child-centered policy priorities on Capitol Hill and beyond, and all the amazing work that the policy team has been doing. So I'm going to pass it on to you so you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica. I would be glad to. Hi, everyone. My name is Mina. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm so proud to be on team policy here at the Young Center. My teammates Anne and Abena have articulated this Young Center vision beautifully, this idea of promoting family unity, treating children as children, and the other priorities they named. And what I would like to do is to describe one of the ways we fight to bring this vision to life, and that is through congressional advocacy. Through this work, we press members of Congress to exercise their powers responsibly and with the best interests of children in mind. This means we influence Congress's power of oversight, their power of the purse, that is to raise revenue, to fund government, to direct government's funding, and of course, the power to craft and pass legislation. On that last point of writing legislation, Anne mentioned the Children's Safe Welcome Act, and I'm so proud of this recent work to get strong child-centered bills introduced. The Children's Safe Welcome Act re-envisions how children are treated in government custody, and is just such a monumental step forward in terms of advancing children's well-being. Yet with all this progress and all this hard work, we are, of course, at the dawn of a new Congress. Congress kicked off a new legislative session, the 118th, legislative session last month. One of the chambers has changed hands, and with this change, we now have our work cut out for us in confronting some really dangerous anti-immigrant rhetoric, and also in blocking the permanent expansion of really awful policies like Title 42, which Abena mentioned earlier, so that we can make sure that those bad policies don't get tacked on to larger bills and then get passed. So certainly we have our challenges, but all is not forsaken. The Young Center and our friends in advocacy have been very successful in influencing Congress's power of the purse, that is engaging with the appropriations process. And here we've had opportunities to fund faster reunifications, safer placements for children. And this is by getting Congress to place in its spending instructions, child-centered directives. So that's one avenue where we really try and bring our vision to life. And another, in addition to advocating for legislative reform in Congress, the Young Center also engages with the administrative rulemaking process within federal agencies. And this is another way to center children's rights, both in policy and in practice.
And I have one more question for you, Mina. Some of President Biden's border plans, which we all heard Vanna discuss at the start of this call, it involves, this rulemaking process that includes proposed measures that have not been implemented yet. This means there's still time to urge the administration against formalizing these proposals that would inflict so much harm on immigrant communities and children. So my question for you is, can you just explain a little bit what some of those proposed measures are that we are working on to prevent, and what I just mentioned, and what additional efforts the Young Center is specifically hoping to advance instead?
Yes, absolutely. Just yesterday, the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security announced a proposed asylum ban rule that would bar many children, families, and adults from being able to seek asylum. Abena spoke to the substance of this asylum ban in her comments, and now I'd like to focus on the opportunity we have to influence through public comment. Where are we in the process? We are here. The proposed rule has been announced. Next, and by next I mean we are expecting this date to be tomorrow, February 23rd. The proposed rule will be published in the Federal Register. Publication in the Federal Register will kick off a 30-day period where you, where I, where everyone on this call has the opportunity to tell the Biden administration we are concerned. And to assist people's abilities to write these comments, the Young Center and our partners in advocacy, we will help to create comment templates and drafts and form letters that will help people call for robust access to asylum. And when the 30-day comment period closes, DHS will take those comments and finalize the rule. The final rule is then expected to go into effect upon May 11th. So the Young Center and our partners, we're currently working very quickly to analyze the current unpublished proposed rule. But what we already know is that banning asylum puts children and families in jeopardy, and that it's egregious that the federal government is planning to move forward on a ban that would fundamentally trample on the rights of children, families, and adults seeking safety.
And my last question for you is, what can people on this call do? I think a lot of people have been waiting for us to let them know what are some of the things that they can do right away to support the work that we're currently doing to ensure that this doesn't move forward.
Yes, thank you so much for asking. I think there are three main ways that I can highlight today that people can take action. One, there is submitting a public comment opposing the asylum ban. Two, there is becoming a Young Center volunteer child advocate, working directly with a child And 3, there is donating to and continuing to support our work.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mina. And before we move on to our Q&A, which we still have about 15 minutes, which is great. We have some time to answer some of the questions that you all have. I see a few on the Q&A function here on Zoom. But before that, I want to get your commitment. And what's important about you committing to ensuring that this asylum ban, basically, that we have talked about doesn't move forward, is that we are going to be able to, by you pledging, we're going to be able to follow up with you a little later once we have a link that you can use to make comments to the administration, as Mina had mentioned. We're going to be able to send you that link. If you, right now when we open this poll, if you pledge that you want to take action, we're going to just follow up with you and send you that link. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, as you can see on your screen, there's a little box. So if you can click yes, if you pledge to submit a comment. And it is a very, very easy process. At least we're working with this coalition. As we mentioned before, we're putting together this website where we're going to be able to submit all these comments that are going to go directly into the government, so that they know that there's a lot of opposition for this asylum ban to move forward, as it will affect children and their families. So we have about 53% of you have said yes. If we can just take maybe one more minute, if there's any other people, as I said before, you're basically just pledging right now that you're going to take action. We don't have a link yet because we're still working on putting together this website together with this coalition partners so that you have the ability to make a comment. So we don't have that yet. So what we're doing right now is asking you to pledge that you're going to take action once we have the ability to make these comments. So we have, well, 42 of you who have said yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. 43. That's amazing. So I'm going to leave this poll up, and y'all can continue to, if you do want to take action, just put yes on this poll. And like I said, we're going to be able to reach back out to you so you can make a comment. So with that said, I'm just going to leave the poll up for a little bit longer in case we have more people. And in the meantime, we're going to answer a few questions from the Q&A. So I'm just going to ask our panelists to all come back so we can have everybody on the screen. And I'm going to open up here the Q&A. Thank you all for pledging. We have about 45 people who are going to take action, which is 45 comments. That's a lot. Thank you. Okay, so some of the questions we have here. So there's an anonymous question, and they are asking, if children will be reunified with adults they came with, even if those adults are not their parents. I think this is in regards to what we were talking about as far as children being reunified with their family members. So would any of our panelists like to answer the question? So do kids get reunified with adults even if they're not their parents?
Ben, I was going to nominate you to talk about reunification.
That's funny. Sure, I can speak to that. And I guess the answer to that is generally yes. However, that's if that adult relative is not deported first. And we, as I mentioned at the end of, the actions that I talked about, we've been pushing for the administration to work for these agencies to work together, for ORR to work with DHS to quickly verify children's relationships with the adults that they're traveling with, and ensure that they're safely released with these family members and keep them together at the border rather than separating them. And then what happens is that sometimes the adult relative is deported before ORR can finish that process of establishing their relationship. And so the answer is generally, in theory, they should be able to be released to an adult relative, but that's something that we've had to fight for and continue to fight for, and can continue to do that with your help.
Yeah, and just to reemphasize something that we always say here at the Young Center is that children are better off with their families. And so we got to do everything we can to make sure that, they have the ability to be with people they trust and that they, they love. So, that might be with grandma, that might be with, someone who might not be specifically a parent. But we're definitely fighting to make sure that, we're, that it's in their best interest, right, to be with their family members. So, okay, we're gonna move on to another question. We have a few more minutes. I think it's sort of related as far as what would trigger a concern for ORR, and I am assuming this is in relation to reunifying kids with other adults. Do any of you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can start. I would say that some concerns are that ORR might have are valid, and other concerns arise out of systemic suspicion of immigrant families, misperceptions about disability issues, other sort of paternalistic viewpoints about who deserves to, have their kids with them. And some of those are difficult to address, but, we can start with some of the perhaps more valid concerns, which could be lack of documentation to prove a relationship, allegations of criminal history, suspected abuse, or concerns about conditions of the home, disclosure of past work history by the child, and whether there are concerns about the child perhaps being trafficked for work or wanting to work rather than go to school. And related to kids with disabilities, ORR will often require the sponsor to have certain things in place before release. So, have identified a medical provider or a mental health care provider, which is, really hard to do for anyone in our healthcare system, much less someone from an immigrant community who might be newer to kind of navigating our complicated healthcare system. So kind of unnecessary barriers can be put up that way as well.
Thank you, Anne. So another question we have is still related to children in custody. And then there's another question about the transit ban. So let's just start with the first one, which is, what are the steps you envision from the current shelter-based system to a safe and compassionate community foster care approach? Do any of you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, so I can start off with some things, and definitely Abena and Mina add in anything as you see fit. Our first goal is to minimize family separation in the first place, and keep families together at the border, including, not just with a parent or guardian, but keeping kids with trusted relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older brothers and sisters, really diverting the flow away from custody is step one, and doing anything possible to kind of minimize time in custody. And then just really, increasing funding to foster care and small settings. There's therapeutic foster care, there are intensive services. We know what works based on experience in the disability rights and foster care systems. And not to say it's easy to get there or it's perfect, but we do have good models. And, with commitment, we can get moving on that path.
Perfect. All right. So there are a few questions about this recent news of the transit ban, or what some of us are calling the asylum ban that was just announced by the Biden administration. Gina is asking, what is a transit country in regards to Biden's border plan?
I can take this one. So basically a transit country is a third country that you travel through between your country of origin and the United States. And what we know is that most, if not all, asylum seekers at the border who are traveling by land will travel through another country before they get to Mexico. So it basically would bar anyone who arrives at the southern border seeking asylum, but didn't first seek asylum in the country they traveled through before they got to the US-Mexico border. And, it's also very difficult to apply for asylum in the first place in any country. But if you're an asylum seeker who doesn't have any connections to those countries, means to access legal services or shelter, I mean, it's virtually impossible to fulfill that requirement of seeking asylum in a third country before arriving at the US. Asylum seekers are in desperate situations and need urgent, safety. And so it's just another barrier that is effectively a bar to asylum. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Avena. And this next one is a little bit hard, but let's try. So can we talk a little bit about the administration's rationale behind the ban? What are their talking points? Do we know how they're, talking about this?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think the Biden administration has been framing this restriction of asylum as a necessary tool to restrict migration. They have framed what is happening at the border as a crisis and presented this ban as a tool for safety, when in reality, it's a humanitarian crisis that we are seeing, and that we have the ability to welcome people with dignity and ensure robust access to asylum when funds are directed appropriately. And that when people flee, they don't necessarily have the time to gather their passports, gather their documents, set up an appointment on an app, and make plans in an orderly fashion by flight to seek safety. When people are fleeing persecution, they often must up and leave, particularly children who cannot control their pathway to safety. So I think definitely the Biden administration is proposing this as a necessary tool, particularly when the Title 42 health order is lifted. This will be seen as something to keep numbers down.
We only have 2 more minutes left, and we have a few more questions. So what we can do is just answer this last question. This is also still related to the transit ban, just so because we're in that topic. And then what we can do is, for the rest of your questions, we can definitely add more information to our follow-up email that everybody's going to get with the link to take action once they have a place where you can comment for this ban or against this ban. So the last question here is, isn't it true that some of these countries don't even have asylum policies in place? And I think they're referring to basically the countries that the Biden administration mentioned, where people have to seek asylum before they get to the US.
Well, I can say I unfortunately am not an expert on asylum in all of these countries that most asylum seekers travel through, but it is very difficult for many asylum seekers to access asylum in these countries. Indigenous people from indigenous communities that are being persecuted in, for instance, Guatemala, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are subject to similar persecution in other countries that they traveled through. Black migrants also similar to similar xenophobic violence it's well documented in Mexico and other countries in Latin America that they travel through to get to the US southern border. So to your point, yes, like asylum protections in these countries are already very limited, and it effectively presents this rule presents as a near total ban for asylum seekers who don't first access asylum in those countries or apply for asylum in those countries. Mina, Anne, if you have more info on, okay.
Well, we're going to wrap this up. We're basically at the end of the hour, but that was so helpful, Abena. And also just want to thank all three of you for just all the information that you provided for everyone on the webinar. I also just want to thank everyone who joined us, and just so grateful that you're here to learn more about what immigrant children go through and what you can do to make sure that their rights are protected. And so we will be following up with an email once we have the website where you can make a comment to the government against this asylum ban. We're going to send that to you along with other resources that we talked about here on the webinar. So thank you everyone for joining. You can always follow us on social media if you want to know what else you can do to support the work that we're doing, and also to be able to donate on our website. Thank you everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.